This video is yet another follow-up to my post on the Kotaku Blacklist story, and in part a response to Total Biscuit's video on the same. I'm also going to discuss later on the coordination problems of getting to good gaming press from bad gaming press, which I barely sort of touched on the last video before I realized how rambling and incoherent it would be. So be warned, I expect this to be rambling and incoherent. I'm going to start by glossing over Total Biscuit's video, and if you want to be sure I'm not misrepresenting him, you can watch the video linked in the description, but I'll just lay out the gist of it. Let me first say that I quite like Total Biscuit, and despite whatever portrayal I might give him here, let me state that I do believe he'd do a better job from a moral and pro-consumer standpoint than I'd be likely to do in his position. In the video, he starts by saying that publishers have no obligation to share early review copies, but he laments Kotaku's being denied them, saying that any information they can provide is of net benefit to the customer. This is not untrue. He goes on to describe the relationship between reviewers like himself and the PR firms that supply review copies, and admits that even he feels the pressures of the PR machine to not betray the companies who provide for him. He suggests it might be significantly more difficult for smaller reviewers for whom the early review is vital. Basically, early reviews are important to reviewers because everyone else is doing early reviews. And they're important to consumers so they know about games earlier, although he avoids noting that the information is unverifiable and can be detrimental if false. We could probably turn this into kind of a trolley problem where a train is going to hit a guy and you can switch the tracks to save him. But in this case, the train is actually like a GameStop employee, and he's going to sell the guy on the tracks a bad game. Now, Total Biscuit's got this early review copy he can throw on the tracks to derail the train. This is a metaphor for early reviews. Please stay with me on this. So this is happening on hundreds of tracks constantly, and other people see this, right? And they say, hey, those tracks look pretty cozy. As long as those reviewers are derailing those nasty trains, I guess I'd better go lay down there. This is dangerous because sometimes good old TV doesn't get that review copy and a train gets through and kills somebody. Or sells them a bad game or something. Anyway, there's this evil wizard, right? And he gives everyone a really short memory so they can't remember anyone getting hit by trains. So all people see is a situation where that track looks pretty comfy thanks to those reviewers, and they keep lying in the tracks. So what we want ultimately is people to stop lying in the tracks, which is a metaphor for buying games at launch. But first, let me backtrack a bit. Why do reviewers all continue the early review system when they know it's creating a false sense of security in underinformed customers? TV himself was among those positive reviews of SimCity that failed to save everyone from the disaster to follow. Why don't reviewers all just do what Breitbart did and say, no, we're going to raise the standard for reviews and simultaneously free ourselves from servitude to these publishers? Which, I'm sorry I didn't work into my metaphors earlier. But forget the metaphors. I'm going to be totally literal here. An ancient Carthaginian demon named Moloch commands these reviewers to maintain this system. They all hate Moloch, but his iron rule cannot be broken by mortal men. Also, they probably all said, I'm going to lose a bunch of money if I stop doing early reviews, and everyone else is going to keep doing it anyway, so why even bother? So there's that. I think Total Biscuit sort of approached, but maybe purposely avoided this idea as out of the question. He states up front that no, publishers don't have to provide review copies or anything else. He concedes that it follows that you may have to sacrifice credibility to obtain these review copies. Yet he defends this system on the basis that more early reviews benefit consumers, ignoring that the whole system is anti-consumer to begin with. Of course it's anti-consumer, it's put in place and enforced by companies that want to take money from consumers. It seems to me, having heard out Total Biscuit on this matter, that maybe I can pinpoint a more exact difference between the reasoned stances here. On one hand, there's the deontologically sound, early review equals better informed consumer. I will throw that review copy on the tracks every time, and I should support Kotaku in their endeavors to do the same. On the other hand, I suppose the utilitarian outlook is that one should probably just burn the whole system to the ground, which is immediately disastrous, but probably the most healthy in the long term. And God help me, I'm talking about ethical systems in game journalism. This is getting beyond my qualifications, so moving on. At the end of the day, I am not a major games publication and can't make decisions for major games publications. This brings me to the second layer of coordination, me and you, the viewer. In case I haven't made my case clear, I believe that early reviews, among other things, are ultimately harmful to the customer experience and to the quality of the medium. Early reviews facilitate early, underinformed purchases, which, in tandem with the dreadful consumer memory length, incentivize a scorched earth policy of marketing-focused game development. Just sell any old pile of trash, make sure it hits all the right points to review well and generate excitement pre-launch, and then take the money and run. And you know, as pro-consumer as I try to be, I have zero sympathy for people who get burned by this, because you should know damn well better at this point. I mentioned SimCity earlier, and I still stand by what I said at the time. If you bought that game, then you are the problem. You are personally making games worse. So what I want here to round out this discussion is to forget about Kotaku and all those other reviewers. They're not even really a variable. Gawker's gonna gawker and all. Let's talk personal responsibility. What can we ourselves do to raise the waterline on gaming press and on the medium as a whole? Well, most of what it comes down to is self-control. There's a massive machine geared towards making you excited for games, making you want, creating a necessity to be filled within you. I found the best way to ignore this is to change how you learn about games. I think a useful strategy is to learn through meta information. I'm not sure this is a skill that can be taught if you don't just have it, but it involves observing patterns in games coverage and public reception. Over time, you can recognize these patterns, and though it may seem counterintuitive, this recognition will serve you far better than the objective information itself. Make use of forums and communities you frequent. Do you spend all day reading an image board about video games instead of playing video games? This can help you. Get good at recognizing not what is said, but how a game is talked about, and you'll be able to predict the quality of games with accuracy. In a more concrete example, consider the early review. Things like embargo dates and who's getting review copies can tell you a lot more than the reviews themselves. Whether or not you've developed a reliable sense of these things, here's the number one most important thing you can do to be a smart game purchaser. Wait. These days, the public is daring to sometimes maybe suggest that pre-ordering is not always the greatest achievement towards which mankind might aspire. I'm willing to take that much further. You should never buy games, systems, or any product at all at launch. And I don't mean wait a week then buy it, I mean maybe just don't buy it. What you can do in that first couple weeks is continue observing meta information. Yeah, spoilers, but remember that the focus is on the meta, and meta spoilers are great. Meta spoilers are basically raw knowledge from which a good purchasing decision is made. You'll notice one of a few things after some time. One, maybe everyone is still pretty excited about the game and moved on to real in-depth discussion. Maybe it's even developed this weird, obnoxious cult following. This is probably a good game. Maybe worth purchasing, and maybe even advantageous to purchase while everyone's engaged. Secondly, maybe everyone stops talking about the game completely. This probably means it was a game that had a lot of potential, but never really ended up being particularly good. Thank God you didn't buy this one on launch. And of course, thirdly, there's the option that it turns out everyone hates the game and the hype turns into outrage. I want to stress, though, that these 3 points are only extremely general perceptions from my own examination. What you need to do is hone your own barometer for this purpose. Match patterns in discussion to your own preferences, learn the patterns of people you trust and are familiar with, and so on. It's much more intuitive than I make it sound. The only challenge really is ignoring all the media directed solely at making you make a purchase, which is pretty well anything in an official capacity, really. Moreover, what you'll probably find a lot of the time is that the simple step of not immediately buying a game when you're supposed to causes you to lose the misplaced hype. A month passes, you're confident now that a game's okay, and you don't want it anymore. The want was artificial. It was an illusion impressed upon you by the marketing machine, and hey, you rolled a 20 on disbelief. Nice one. That's one less uninstalled game you barely touched in that Steam library. Maybe you should get to work on that list, And I think this is where I'm going to lose a lot of people here, because I'm going to absolutely encourage you to buy as few games as possible. You should become a goddamn pretentious asshole about it. You absolutely have to have the mindset that a game isn't something you need, that developers have to talk you into it. I see too many times people reluctantly buy a game that they aren't too thrilled about just because it's the big game that's out. It's what you buy now. No, reject this. My big example is Mass Effect 3. This is a game that reneged on a lot of promises made and was really actively hostile towards the series' original fan base, both through design and through its promotion and how it was talked about. I'm told it's a pretty decent game in spite of this. I will never play it. I'm quite certain it's worth $60, let alone whatever price it is now. I will never play it. I will never play it because I won't condone it. I said earlier that the key was self-control. Well, the other half is self-respect. You don't have to buy every game because you deserve better. This is something Sean Malmstrom talks about a lot with his interpretation of the hardcore gamer as the guy who has no standards and plays every barely stimulating piece of entertainment put in front of him. You, listening to this right now, are better than that. You have to be better than that because you want things to be good, and this is how you get it. You remember that scene in The Matrix where the architect says he's going to destroy the Matrix because Neo won't cooperate, and Neo tries to call his bluff, but the architect says that there's levels of survival that he's willing to accept? I don't remember it, and I'm probably getting it wrong. But you have to be that guy. You have to be willing to say, if games are not good, I will not buy games. If games are never good, again, I will not buy them. Back to Sean Malmstrom, he's a guy who made a name for himself explaining the Wii in terms of blue ocean and disruption. He believes that the explosion of the Wii wasn't to a new market, but rather a dark market. People who found no games for them since the NES and simply stopped purchasing. They didn't go away, they just were no longer catered to. He believes this because he considered himself such a person, and states that he's more than willing to stop buying games again. I don't know if this demographic actually exists, but I really feel like it ought to. I mean, why not? Think of how many amazing games are out there. Think of how many amazing games you already own even. If someone told me right now that I could never buy a new game again for as long as I live, I'd be entertained indefinitely. I'd maybe get through half of my Steam backlog. When you stop viewing games as something that you're supposed to want, as like a consumable good, and start valuing them for the fun you have playing them, they stop being a consumable and start being a treasure. Games are for life, not just for Christmas, as they say. Why do you think there's been this movement for so many years away from gameplay-centric games toward these short narrative experiences? Well, there's actually a lot of reasons, and that's probably another video. But certainly one is that turning games into movies means we keep buying new games. If there ever was a way to fight this, like anything else, it's not buying into it. So I'm pretty much done my ranting at this point, and it's maybe time to bring this back around to where we started. Kotaku, as an aspirant regurgitator of PR, exists not in service of the consumer, but in service of moving your money to the pockets of publishers. They want you to want this. They want you to want. This is how the system perpetuates. Kotaku, having deviated from the system, still won't decry it. Even the good reviewers like Total Biscuit aren't the ones to do it because, hey, it's their fucking job. I don't truly hold that against them, even against Kotaku, really, despite how I've probably made it sound. The thing is, by doing your part to make a positive change in how we partake in the medium, you're taking back power as a consumer. That power will influence press and publications who want your readership, who will in turn drag the PR teams and the publishers into alignment. Because whether you like Kotaku or not, if you burn the system down tomorrow, they're still around if they want to be, and they'll be better for it. At the end of the day, Totillo surely wants Kotaku to live up to his beliefs about Kotaku, and in a weird way, I respect him for it. Thank you, and good luck.